Irashaimase. Hello and welcome to Fataris' Kitchen. I'm your host, Chef Fataris. It's time once again for Shoot 'em Up Saturday, and on the menu this week we have Assault Suit Leynos 2 Saturn Tribute. What kind of taste will it have? Let's get cooking and find out. This title's been a lot of fun for me to dive into. It's classic mecha run and gun action on what I feel is a very solid port. The game boasts great customization for your mechs, though I do feel it's a bit on the shorter side. And there is one frustrating stage that's this Escort mission that could potentially ruin the title for some. But with all that said, if you're a fan of mecha titles, this is definitely one that I would look into. Finding ourselves at the title screen, when you start from here, we're taken to the file select. At this point, you can either continue a file you've previously started, or you can start a whole new save file. I'll go and show a little bit of both for today's video. So initially starting with a brand new save file, once you select your file, you've got this little bit of story that's presented to you. So you do see a story like this before every single stage, and then throughout the course of the stages themselves, there's a lot of character dialogue that help build the world and the story that's going on. There's also a story summary in the playing guide, so if you're interested in the world of Leynos, definitely check that out. So initially when you begin a mission, there's usually a preparation stage where you're preparing your mech, but especially when you first start up your save, we're dropped right into the action. So there's a fair bit of story here, but we're going to jump past that so we can get to the action. And we initially start off with this particular mech. So we are given the Leynos 2 Assault Suit. That's what you start by default. However, throughout the course of your gameplay, you can choose a different assault suit, or you can potentially unlock additional ones, as well as weapons. So as far as our abilities are concerned, this is a run and gun that has a lot of mobility options. However, we are playing as a mech, so things do feel clunky. So we can dash, we can move left and right, we can even jump and use our boosters to stay in the air. As far as weapons are concerned, so if you look at the top screen, you see that we've got multiple slots there. So basically think of each one of those squares as a slot, and then off to the right in the HUD, you can see how that ties to our buttons. So as far as we have 3 weapons right now, a shield, and then we also have a button that controls our auto aim as well as our jump. Then there's also the abilities to dash, as I mentioned before. So let's talk a little bit about how the weapon slots actually work. So right now we're equipped with 3 different weapons. So if we press the B button, for example, that gives us slot 1. And the weapons that we use, we currently have auto aim turned on, so we'll currently be auto aiming on the enemies that we have. But unfortunately, the enemies we're fighting are currently above us, so we'll have to jump up to target those enemies. One thing that can be a little bit finicky about the game itself is how it handles the zoom. So depending on which weapon you currently are holding, and when you press a different weapon button, you do swap to that weapon, it will change your zoom. So if we jump from the machine gun to the shotgun, we zoom, strangely enough, we zoom out, and now we can see a little bit more of the field of view for the weapon we have. Some weapons, like the assault rifles, will zoom out even further. So one thing that's kind of odd about the game as well is the way that you handle missions. So each of the stages have different missions, and depending on which stage it is, you'll have different objectives you need to complete before you can move on. So in this case, we need to destroy a certain number of enemies before the game will progress, as well as moving to the right, and then we'll ultimately be able to get to the boss of the stage. If you're ever confused about the stage itself, one thing you can do is press the minus button, which will pull up the Zebra Engine menu here. And one thing that's really nice is in the center of the screen, it gives you a summary of the stage you're currently engaged in, with any hints or suggestions as far as the gameplay is concerned. So as it says here, you can swap between the weapons. At the bottom here, it says this stage is perfect for learning the controls of your assault suit. In addition to that, you can also see all the commands we have for the emulation engine over there on the left. So there's a really nice rewind function which allows you to go and jump quite a bit back in your gameplay So if you have some gameplay you'd rather erase or a step that you want to take back to potentially have a better run, you can definitely do that here. There's some great screen options. Then there's that playing guide that I mentioned, which we'll look at it a bit, as well as a database. Now back to the stage itself, we're going to use the shotgun to hopefully take out enemies here as quickly as possible. So now that we've gotten this bit of dialogue here, we know that we'll be able to progress shortly to the left. One thing to note is you're graded on several things throughout the course of your stages. One of the primary targets we're trying to get is to complete the stages quickly, so the longer we take, the lower our overall grade of the stage will be. Also, defeating enemies will give you additional enemy points, and also if you happen to zoom past enemies without fighting them, that does count negatively against you, so keep that in mind. So now here we're going to encounter our first boss of the game itself, this massive, as they're referring to it, a mecha tortoise. So weapon-wise, the machine gun I have isn't very effective. The shotgun does do a decent job, but one thing about your suit you have is you have 2 additional weapons you can equip. So when you press the start menu and actually enter the game's actual pause menu, we have this command here. We can set the weapon, and then we can select from these extra weapons that we have available to us down here. So I'm going to take this punch and place it over our machine gun, and I'm also going to grab this assault rifle and throw it on our shield, which, I mean, the shielding is good, but I just tend to go straight for the offense rather than the defense. Once you're taken care of there, you can press start and start again to exit the screen, and this is our mecha tortoise. So one thing to note about the gameplay is that it is a pretty decent emulation for the Sega Saturn. So of course, one thing to keep in mind, as people usually do complain with the Zebra engine, there is some minor input lag with this one. It doesn't feel too bad as far to me personally, but I don't know the exact amount of lag the game has. But the one thing that the game does have is, since it is emulating the Saturn, we do have some of the slowdown that is present in the original version. So, as far as this boss is concerned, I like to go and fight at close range and actually use the punch, as that's our most powerful weapon that we have, if you can call the punch a weapon. Just getting right up close and personal and attacking it. So it does give me, this is where I have taken a fair bit of shots from the ship's cannons. One thing I can talk about is the way that the health system works. So you have a shield, or health rather, for your mech, and as you take damage you will have repair that takes place, but it does go and burn up energy, which is the blue bar off to the left of our health. So we've been able to go and destroy that boss, and we get additional story, and we're taken to our evaluation. So as I mentioned, this is actually very important. So you have the enemy points, how many points you earned for defeating the enemies, minus the number of points for your damage, bonuses, penalties, and you ultimately get a rank and technical points. Those are extremely important, because after you go to this screen, you unlock additional equipment based off your performance. So the better your performance, the more weapons you'll earn, up to 8 per stage, as well as devices and additional armor. Then after that, we can save the game and we move on to the next stage. And that's the basis of Assault Suit Leynos, at least as far as the first stage is concerned. Now we get to some of the real meat of the game. So between stages, you have the ability to choose between your assault suits. And when you initially are starting the game, we only have 2 suits available. Throughout the course of the gameplay, it's possible to unlock 6 additional suits, and some of those will come with their own unique weapons. So we'll stick with the Leynos 2. And then after that, you've got this menu here. So before we move on to anything else, we'll talk a little bit about this screen. So it has the ability for us to change our power. So the mobile, how much of a load we can put on the mech itself, weapons, how powerful, how much weapon power we have available, as well as repair, how quickly the mech will repair. So for the base setup, what we have here is pretty good. Exit out, you can go to your weapons. So here we have the ability to equip weapons that we've either unlocked or that we also already have in our inventory. So we have a more powerful version of our machine gun, this machine gun 247, so we're going to replace our current one with that. Let's bump up the shotgun as well, and we'll leave everything else more or less the same. Except one of the weapons that we unlocked in the last stage was this napalm. So instead of using the missile, which only has 12 missiles that we could use, we'll replace that with this napalm. And we'll exit out from there. So now that we're happy with our weapon loadout, we can move on to devices. So devices allows us to equip various like power-ups. One thing that's a bit unfortunate about this game is that it doesn't give you a clear description of what these devices are in the game itself. However, if you go and pull up specifically the database, you can find stats for all the weapons that you can potentially unlock, as well as brief descriptions for all of the devices that we have in the game, which is really appreciated. As sometimes, like, knowing what a mobile EX is, although it does go and kind of say, it still might be a little bit obtuse. So here you can go through, you can see what all the abilities do, and there's a couple that are at the very end that are a bit of a surprise, but as you progress through the game, you get better at the gameplay, and you're able to unlock additional weapons and additional devices you can make for a really powerful mech. In addition to that database, there's a great player's guide. So the player's guide, like I mentioned, it's basically your manual, and it will go over a lot of the details of the game itself. So if you're looking to really dive into this one, I highly encourage you to read through this, as it has a lot of great information about all the various screens, including how you equip weapons, how you unlock weapons, and the story itself. So getting back to the gameplay itself, you have 4 different devices you can equip. One thing you do have to keep in mind is as you equip those, it will add a heavier load on the mech, so keep that in mind. I do like having reload speed, so we'll go and throw on high speed reloader, and you can also throw on the enemy analyzer for information about the enemy health. Backing out of here, we can also adjust our armor. So if we unlock additional armors, we can pick up those, and depending on which stages you're in will depend on what kind of armor you want, as the stats A, B, and C are different ammo types. So A is your standard bullets, that sort of thing. B's energy weapons, and C are explosives, missiles, grenades, that sort of weaponry. So do keep that in mind. And then if you wanted to go and change your base assault suit, you can do that here again. Once all that's selected, you press start mission, and we get another bit of story. We're starting the stage itself. So this stage is a bit interesting. We're actually scaling this mountain to fight this base that's at the top of it. You do encounter a lot of dialogue throughout the course of dealing with the stages themselves, and one thing to keep in mind, you can skip past the dialogue a little faster if you press the start or plus button, but if the dialogue comes to an end, you will enter the pause menu, which might not necessarily be the worst thing. So we're going to quickly jump up the section here. So there's this large laser cannon that we have to be careful of at the top of this canyon here, as if it's very possible for it to go and do significant damage to our mech if we're not careful. And, well, speaking of being careful, I keep on jumping up and then falling down. So there is a fair bit of momentum that you need to work on preserving with your movement. Especially since there are space stages into the game as well. That's something you can see throughout the course of the game. So in order to make shorter work of the enemy here, we're going to use our napalm, as that's the strongest weapon that we currently have available to us. After we defeat that laser, we can progress further into the stage itself, and oftentimes you will go and see these little scenes of dialogue before we can move on to the next section of the stage. That's usually how you know you're progressing the mission correctly. As I mentioned, you can go and pull up the game menu here to see some hints and suggestions for how to go and move through the stage. I do really appreciate that that's present here. Then we can move through the stage, and there's this section here where we are fighting a more elite enemy, as well as all these enemies that will spawn in from this base itself. And that's, for the most part, is the flow of the game. So as I mentioned at the beginning, there is one stage that's particularly frustrating. In stage 4, there is this escort mission that you'll be playing through where you have to escort a tanker through the stage. But the game, that stage itself, has a lot of issues where it can be the tanker doesn't have much HP and will be destroyed quite easily. In addition to that, once it's left the screen, if the enemies have left the screen with it, it's potentially possible that the mech will, or rather the tanker, will get destroyed by the enemies that are off screen, and you can't do anything about that. Even the guide that I mentioned will basically tell you to just restart the stage. So the first two stages taken care of. I didn't do the best trying to defeat all the enemies, but we still did get a rank of C and some technical points. So once again, coming to the new arms, if you've met the targets that the game's presented for getting the weapons, you'll go and see those presented in blue squares up at the top. So we did unlock some additional weapons, plasma rifle, a Gatling gun, as well as some new armor and other devices as well. But rather than continue the game from here, I'm actually going to load up a save and jump a little bit ahead so you can kind of see how some of the action happens in space, and also when we have a more advanced save file with even more options for setting up our mech. So now we've jumped to a save that's at the beginning of Mission 6. So as you can see here, a lot of what we have set up is similar to where we were at in previous stages. However, there are significantly more options of it unlocked at this point, where this is also a New Game Plus save for both weapons as well as devices. So if we take a second to look at our weapons, we have a number of options now available to us. All these machine guns that boast higher power, although they do have more weight, so that will affect your mech, something you do have to go and balance. Gatling guns, more powerful shotguns, assault rifles, plasma rifles, and even laser rifles, which are really fun and awesome to use. So if we wanted to swap things around, for example, we could take this plasma rifle and swap it over this shotgun that I currently have equipped. Though you do always have to make sure that you have enough capacity on your mech to equip the weapons you're choosing. Then once we're done at this screen, we can back out. As you can see, there's also all these other additional devices that we've unlocked, and having the ability with the database to know more of what these do is appreciated. Like ES system here doesn't make a whole lot of sense just looking at it, but this one is energy system. It basically gives us a more efficient usage of the energy for both our repair as well as the energy weapons, where we are currently equipped with a laser as well as a plasma rifle. Those do both use that. We also have more armor that's available for us, and as I mentioned, there's the three types of ammunition that the enemies will be using: the bullets, the energy weapons, and the explosive. So for the stage we're about to encounter, we kind of want the best armor that we can currently equip from a weight standpoint. So that would definitely be this one here, but it's actually extremely heavy, so we'll have to go and pick something maybe just a little bit lighter. Then once our loadout is all complete, once again, we can start the mission. However, if your armor or like your weight is a little bit too high, you actually won't be able to go and start. So once again, balancing things is actually very important. So since we are overweight, let's go and look at a different way that we can equip our mech. So we can go back into device, and rather than go with this power GX, we can go to this mobile GX and equip additional capacity for the mech. But then we have to go to our power, and we can draw some weapon power, since we're not using all of our weapon power, and put it into the mobile until you can see our maximum low is now high enough that we can, I do have to confirm that though, that we can see that the maximum load is now high enough that we can properly start the stage with this better armor, which is going to go suit our purposes significantly better than one that's overall weaker, as the enemy fire in this stage in particular is pretty heavy. So we start off in space. We're on this battleship carrier that we've, let's see, ridden into this space station that we're assaulting here. There's of course more, let's see, story dialogue, and then you can see things are significantly more chaotic as far as our movement, as we're now free flying through space using thrusters equipped on our assault suits. And the enemies will come from all around, up, down, below, and so we do have to be careful with that. We also have these large enemies that in the previous stage actually act as the boss, but now they're just a regular enemy that we need to take out. So if you're not careful though, it is possible to go and take some pretty heavy damage really quick from some of those lasers. So here we'll go and use the rewind to back things up a little bit and maybe not take as much heavy a damage from these enemies. Laser cannon's definitely the way to go, but being able to use other weapons like, say, the plasma rifle here, but keep in mind, the energy weapons are using both the energy that we're using to replenish our HP as well, so if you're not careful, you'll not be able to restore your HP, and even at the end, then you'll ultimately get a game over. The game over does just reset you back to the start of the screen though, so it's, or rather the start of the stage, so you're not going to necessarily lose out of a whole lot from that. So one quick thing to go and talk about, the auto aim can actually be pretty finicky about where it's choosing to aim, so you do have to be careful with, and there'll be choice times where you would want to advance your gameplay through certain stages by using the manual aim, and turning that off, you've got the ability to either just use manual or you can set a fixed aim as well. And that's Assault Suit Leynos served up for your enjoyment. So as far as the minus flavors are concerned, so sometimes the gameplay can get a bit frustrating, particularly with that Escort mission that I was talking about earlier. That's definitely one of the sections where the game can be most frustrating and potentially put off a lot of players. In addition to that, there are times where your mech can feel extremely clunky working through a lot of enemies and stages, and in situations here where it even seems like our auto aim is choosing to target enemies that we can't really even see, that's something that can be a bit of a frustration. Like the camera as well can be a bit finicky to play with. But on the plus flavors, so the game itself is a really fun challenge. We have all these unlockables that we can get through playthroughs. You have all the weapons you can unlock, the devices, the armors, the additional assault suits themselves. It makes for a really satisfying gameplay. And some of the whole like gameplay of trying to figure out how best to get through a section without like taking as much damage or scoring more points is also, it's a really satisfying experience the whole way through. Then also, like, the sheer customization with all those unlocks you can get provides for a lot of variety to your gameplay, and that's what I feel the strength of the title is. Also, having a solid port with all that information for a game that doesn't have a whole lot of information available for it is also very, very welcome. So at the end of the day, Assault Suit Leynos 2 is one that I've had a lot of fun with, and at the end, it's one that I can recommend. Though one thing that I do want to keep in mind is that this kind of a title isn't necessarily going to be for everybody. It's definitely retro and it's got some quirky elements to it, but if you liked what you saw here and you enjoy mechs, definitely this is one to check out. And with that, we find ourselves at the end of this week's episode of Shoot 'em Up Saturday. As always, we want to thank you so much for joining us. We hope you have a wonderful week yourself, and we look forward to seeing you again next time.